Emily thought she finally knew who she was. But the truth inside that DNA envelope would tear her world apart. One secret, buried for 28 years, was about to surface on national television. And when Dr. Phill read the results, even he went silent. The lights burned hot under the studio ceiling. Cameras rolled. You could hear the faint hum of the crowd, restless, expectant, like they somehow knew what was about to happen. Across the stage, a mother sat trembling, her hands clasped so tight they turned white. And in front of her, Emily, her daughter, or at least the woman she'd raised as one. Dr. Phil's voice cut through the silence. "Emily, are you ready to know the truth?" Emily nodded, barely breathing. The audience leaned in. A single envelope lay on the table between them, thin, harmless-looking, but carrying a weight no one could imagine. For a heartbeat, time froze. The paper crinkled as it was lifted. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Please," she whispered, "just tell me the truth." The air felt electric, charged with years of secrets. But before we open that envelope, we have to go back to the moment this all began. Because the truth didn't start here. It started with a whisper 3 weeks earlier. The studio lights were blinding. They cast a halo of gold around Emily's face, but inside she felt nothing but cold. The kind of cold that starts in your stomach and creeps into your chest until even breathing hurts. She sat on that leather chair, cameras trained on her every blink, every tremor. Across from her sat the woman she'd called Mom her entire life. Margaret, eyes red, lips trembling, clutching a crumpled tissue as though it could hold her world together. Dr. Phill sat between them, calm but watchful. His tone was gentle, but his words hung heavy. "Emily," he said, "you've told us that something changed the way you see your family. Can you tell us what happened?" Emily's hands shook as she tried to speak. Her voice came out thin, like paper tearing. It started with a sound, just a whisper. But once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. The camera zoomed in on her face, every blink heavy with the weight of the unknown. The audience sat still. Even those in the back rows leaned forward, as if afraid to miss a single word. Emily looked at her mother, then back at Dr. Phill. "For 28 years, I thought my life made sense. I thought I knew where I came from, who I belonged to. But I was wrong. And it all began with a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear." Her voice cracked. Margaret's chin dropped, guilt written across her face like a confession. "Emily, please," she whispered, but Emily's words rolled on, trembling with years of confusion and anger. She said, "She can't ever find out. Not now." That's what I heard her say. The crowd gasped, the sound soft but sharp, like the inhale before a storm. Emily's eyes glistened. At first, I told myself I misunderstood. I didn't want to believe my mom was hiding something from me. But the tone in her voice, it was fear, pure fear. And from that moment, I couldn't stop wondering, what was she so afraid of me finding out? Dr. Phill leaned forward slightly, his voice low. "And that's when you decided to take the DNA test?" Emily nodded slowly. "Yeah, I needed to know if I was crazy or if my whole life had been a lie." She looked toward the audience, her voice trembling. "I didn't do it to hurt her. I just wanted the truth." Margaret broke down, tears running freely now. "I never wanted to lie to you," she said through sobs. I wanted to protect you." The host gave her a moment, but Emily stayed still, too afraid to move, too afraid that if she did, the world around her would collapse completely. She whispered, "Protect me from what?" That single line cut through the silence like a blade. The moment hung there, thick with unanswered questions. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Dr. Phill glanced toward the envelope on the table, but didn't touch it yet. "Before we go any further," he said softly, "let's take a step back. Let's understand what led us here." The tension eased, just enough to breathe, but it didn't break. Emily wiped her tears, her voice quiet but steady. 3 weeks before this show, that's when it started. The night that changed everything. The screen fades. The crowd fades. And suddenly, we're not in a studio anymore. We're in a quiet kitchen, under a dim yellow light. A clock ticks. A kettle hisses. And behind the doorway, Emily hears something that shatters her peace forever. Because sometimes, the most dangerous secrets don't scream. They whisper, "What would you do if your entire identity rested on a single piece of paper?" It was 11:47 p.m., the kind of night when the world feels asleep, except for one voice Emily wasn't meant to hear. She had gone downstairs for a glass of water. The old wood floor creaked beneath her feet, the refrigerator humming softly in the dark. That's when she heard it, her mother's voice, low and urgent, coming from behind the half-closed kitchen door. At first, she didn't think much of it. Margaret often took late-night calls from the hospital. She'd been a nurse her whole life, always comforting patients, always calm. But this tone was different. There was panic hiding beneath the whisper. Emily froze. Then she heard the words. "She can't ever find out. Not now. Please, just let it stay buried." Buried. That word sliced through Emily's chest like ice. Her heart began to race. Who was she? What secret couldn't she find out? Emily leaned closer, her bare feet pressed against the cold tile. Through the narrow gap in the door, she saw her mother's silhouette, hunched over the counter, one hand pressed to her forehead, the other gripping the phone like it was keeping her alive. Margaret's voice trembled. If she takes that test, everything will fall apart. For a moment, Emily thought she might pass out. What test? Was it about her? About Dad? About someone else? The call ended abruptly. Margaret stood still, head bowed, breathing hard. Then, slowly, she turned off the kitchen light and walked upstairs. Emily barely made it to her room before her knees gave out. She sat on her bed, in the dark, her pulse hammering in her ears. That night, she didn't sleep. Every childhood memory, birthdays, family dinners, bedtime stories, flashed through her mind like puzzle pieces suddenly rearranging. What if the woman she'd called Mom wasn't telling the truth? By sunrise, curiosity had turned into fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear that her entire identity was built on something false. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, studying her own face like it belonged to someone else. The nose she always thought she'd inherited from Margaret. The hazel eyes everyone said were just like hers. Now, she wasn't so sure. Later that morning, she tried to act normal, sitting at the kitchen table as her mom poured coffee, pretending she hadn't heard a thing. "Rough night?" Margaret asked gently, offering a tired smile. "Yeah," Emily said. "Couldn't sleep." Her mother reached over, brushing a strand of hair from Emily's face, the way she had since she was a child. That familiar touch felt foreign now, warm on the outside, but distant underneath. Emily wanted to ask, to scream, but she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she excused herself, went to her room, and pulled out her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. One search, 3 words, at-home DNA test. Within minutes, she'd ordered one. 2 swabs. One for her, one for her mom. She'd tell her it was just for fun, maybe a family tree project. But deep down, she knew this wasn't curiosity. It was survival. As she clicked confirm order, her chest tightened. She whispered to herself, "What if I'm wrong?" But somewhere deeper, somewhere she didn't want to admit, she whispered something else. "What if I'm right?" Days passed, but the silence between them grew louder. Margaret seemed distracted, lost in her thoughts. Emily caught her staring sometimes, like she knew something was coming. Then, one Thursday afternoon, a plain white package appeared on the porch. No logo, no note, just her name printed across the top. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. The test was simple. A few swabs, a little spit, a promise of truth in 6 to 8 business days. She sealed the box, pressed the label on, and stood at the mailbox for almost a full minute before she let it go. Watching it disappear down that dark metal slot felt like releasing her entire past into a machine. But deep down, she knew, once the truth is sent out, it can't be unsent. She turned back toward the house, the setting sun casting long shadows through the trees. Inside, Margaret was cooking dinner, humming softly like nothing had changed. Emily forced a smile, but inside, a storm was brewing. Because she knew that soon, everything would. It was just one sentence, one whisper, but it changed how Emily saw her entire life. And when that package came back, carrying the truth she thought she wanted, she'd realized something even darker was waiting. Because sometimes the truth doesn't come in loud confessions. It comes in quiet envelopes. Is the truth worth losing the person who raised you? The test results still hadn't come back, but the silence in the house felt heavier by the day, like both of them were pretending not to notice the growing crack in the floor beneath them. A week had passed since Emily mailed that package. Each morning, she checked her email the moment she woke up. Nothing. Every ding from her phone made her heart skip, and every disappointment chipped away at her calm. Margaret tried to act normal. She cooked, cleaned, watched her shows. But sometimes, Emily caught her just standing at the window, staring at nothing, her eyes distant and full of guilt. One Saturday afternoon, Emily offered to help pack boxes for a neighborhood donation drive. It felt safer than talking. They worked in silence, folding old clothes and sorting toys from her childhood. And that's when Emily noticed it, a small, velvet jewelry box sitting at the bottom of an old drawer. It was one she'd never seen before. Deep red, with a gold clasp that had tarnished over time. Curiosity tugged at her. "Mom, what's this?" she asked. Margaret's face drained of color. "Just old memories," she said too quickly. "Leave it there." But Emily's hands were already moving. She opened the box. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed, creased, fragile. At the top, written in neat typewriter font, were the words, "To the family of baby A." Her breath caught. She unfolded it carefully, eyes racing down the lines. "We deeply regret the incident that occurred on May 19th, 1997, at St. Mary's Hospital. Due to a critical error during the neonatal transfer process, an infant identified as baby A was mistakenly placed in the care of another family." The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. Neonatal transfer error. Mistakenly placed. It didn't make sense. None of it did. Her voice trembled. "Mom, what is this?" Margaret's lips parted, but no sound came out. She reached for the letter, but Emily pulled back. "Tell me what this means," she demanded. Margaret shook her head, eyes filling with tears. "It was supposed to be gone. I burned the others. The others." Emily's heart pounded. "Others? What do you mean, others?" Margaret collapsed into a chair, covering her face. You were so tiny, Emily. You stopped breathing that night. They took you away, and then they brought you back and said you were fine. I didn't question it. I couldn't. You were alive. That's all that mattered." Emily stared at her mother, the woman who'd tucked her in, bandaged her knees, cried at her graduation. "Are you saying," she whispered, voice cracking, "that I'm not your daughter?" Margaret sobbed harder. "I am your mother," she insisted. "Maybe not by blood, but I raised you. I loved you. Every second of your life, I loved you." Emily stood frozen, her body trembling. "But you knew there was a chance. I couldn't lose you," Margaret cried. "You were mine. They told us it was fixed, that the babies were back where they belonged." The room seemed to close in. Emily couldn't breathe. She felt like she was falling into a memory that wasn't hers. She clutched the letter tighter. That's when she noticed the signature at the bottom. Not her mother's handwriting, but someone else's. The name, Dr. Helen Reed. Reed? The name felt familiar, though she didn't know why. Emily ran upstairs, searching through drawers, documents, anything that might connect the dots. Her hand shook as she found her own birth certificate, signed by a different attending physician. Not Reed. Her mind raced. Who was Helen Reed? And why was she the one writing to the family of Babia? That night, Emily couldn't stop replaying the conversation. The words from the letter burned in her mind. Mistakenly placed in the care of another family. Her mother had told her the truth, or at least a version of it. But there was more. There was always more. She decided to call her Aunt Claire, Margaret's sister, someone who'd always been brutally honest. If anyone would tell her the truth, it was her. Claire picked up on the second ring. Her voice cracked the moment she heard Emily's name. "Sweetheart, she finally told you, didn't she?" Emily's throat tightened. "Told me what?" There was a long pause, then a sigh that sounded like 20 years of guilt. "I begged her to tell you when you turned 18. But she couldn't. She was scared you'd hate her." "Hate her for what?" Claire hesitated. "For keeping the letter. For never returning you." Emily felt the air leave her lungs. "Returning me?" "Yes," Claire whispered. "There was another baby that night, Emily. A baby boy who didn't make it. The hospital panicked, and things got covered up. But your mother, she refused to let you go. Tears streamed down Emily's face as she whispered, "So who am I?" "Your name wasn't always Emily," Claire said softly. "At least, not on the hospital records." The line went quiet, and that silence, heavier than any scream, told Emily everything she needed to know. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a cover-up, and the signature at the bottom of that letter wasn't her mother's. If love is built on a lie, can it still be real? The letter had cracked something open inside Emily, but the signature had lit the fuse. Dr. Helen Reed. That name echoed in her mind for days. She couldn't focus, couldn't sleep. She combed through old records online, old newspaper clippings, hospital archives. It was like chasing a ghost, until one search result stopped her cold. A brief obituary from 2011. Dr. Helen Reed, survived by her husband, Thomas Reed, and their son, Michael. Her pulse quickened. Thomas Reed, the same last name. Could it be? She hesitated for a moment, then typed it. Thomas Reed, Kansas contact. There was a small-town listing, a farm address. That night, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was staring straight into her past. By morning, she'd made her decision. She packed a small bag, grabbed her car keys, and drove. The miles blurred together, gray highways, endless fields, 1,000 what-ifs running through her mind. By the time she reached the old farmhouse, the sky was pink with sunset. A wooden fence surrounded acres of wheat, swaying in the wind. There was a rusted mailbox with fading letters, Reed Family Farm. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. She parked, stepped out, and walked up the long gravel path. Every crunch of her boots echoed like a heartbeat. An older man came out to meet her. Broad shoulders, silver hair, worn hands. His eyes were cautious, the kind of eyes that had seen loss and learned to live with it. "Can I help you?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. Emily froze. "Are you Thomas Reed?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. Who's asking?" She swallowed. "My name's Emily. Emily Carter, or at least, that's what I've been told." He tilted his head. "All right, what's this about?" Her voice cracked. "Do you remember a hospital in 1997? St. Mary's." The color drained from his face. For a second, he didn't breathe. Then, quietly, he said, "You'd better come inside." The farmhouse smelled like coffee and dust, the scent of time standing still. Photos lined the walls, smiling faces, children playing, a woman with soft eyes who must have been his late wife. Thomas sat down heavily at the table, his hands trembling. "I always wondered if this day would come," he said. Emily stared, confused. You know what I'm talking about?" He nodded. "My wife, Helen, she worked at that hospital. The night our baby was born, there was an accident." His voice broke. "They told us he didn't make it, that we should say goodbye." He looked down, his voice barely a whisper. But Helen never believed it. She said she held him, said he was breathing. She wanted to see the records, but the hospital shut her out. Then she got sick, and before she passed, she told me something I never forgot. Emily leaned forward, her hands shaking. "What did she tell you?" He looked up at her with eyes full of grief. She said, "Our son isn't gone. Someone took him. Or maybe someone took her." The air left the room. Emily's heart stopped. "Her," she whispered. Thomas nodded. She thought the babies got switched, that someone took home the wrong child, and that child grew up never knowing. The words hit Emily like a wave. For a moment, she couldn't move, couldn't even think. Thomas studied her face quietly. Then, in a trembling voice, he said, "You've got her eyes, you know. My wife's. Same blue, same sadness." Tears spilled down Emily's cheeks. "You really think I could be yours?" He smiled sadly. "I don't know what to think. But if you are, then you've been missed every single day for 28 years. Emily pressed her hand to her chest, trying to steady her breath. "I took a DNA test," she said quietly. "It's being processed. I should know soon." Thomas nodded. "Whatever it says, I just want you to know I don't blame anyone. Not your mother. Not you. Life, it does strange things to people when they're desperate to hold on to love." His kindness broke her. She covered her face, sobbing. All those years of confusion and anger, and here was a man she'd never met, comforting her. As she stood to leave, Thomas placed a hand on her shoulder. "If it turns out you're mine," he said softly, "you'll always have a home here. If not, you still do." Emily drove away with tears blurring the road. The wind carried the scent of wheat and rain. For the first time, she wasn't angry, just lost. Back home, she stared at the empty spot on her nightstand where the DNA envelope would soon be. But then, a new email notification flashed across her screen. Dr. Phill Show Inquiry, Family Reunion Stories. Emily blinked. Was this a joke? It wasn't. The message explained that producers had read her online forum post about hospital mix-ups and wanted to feature her story. She stared at the screen, her hands trembling. Maybe this was fate's way of forcing the truth into the light. But she had no idea that light was about to burn through everything she thought she knew. Because when the truth finally came, it wouldn't just reveal who she was. It would show what love really means. How do you love two families who both lost you? The air inside the studio felt heavier than oxygen. Every spotlight seemed to burn brighter, every whisper from the audience sharper. Emily sat in the same chair from before, her hands clasped tight in her lap. The envelope, the same one she had been running from and chasing toward for weeks, sat only inches away. Dr. Phil's tone was calm, deliberate, but beneath it was that slight edge, the one that meant what was about to happen wasn't television. It was real life. "Emily," he said softly, "you've waited a long time for this." She nodded, eyes wet, voice barely a whisper. "All my life." Across from her, Margaret sat rigid, a shell of the woman she once was. Her makeup was neat, but her hands trembled. Beside her, Thomas sat quietly, his weathered hands folded, his gaze never leaving Emily's face. The cameras rolled in close. The envelope crinkled as Dr. Phill picked it up. The sound sliced through the silence. He paused for a long moment, long enough for the whole room to stop breathing. Then he opened it. Everyone leaned forward. According to the DNA test, he began slowly. "Emily Carter is not biologically related to Margaret Carter." The crowd gasped, a wave of shock rippling through the room. Margaret covered her mouth with shaking hands. Emily sat motionless, eyes wide but empty, as if her brain hadn't yet caught up with her heart. Dr. Phill continued carefully. However, he looked toward Thomas. "She shares a 99.98% match with Thomas Reed." For a full 3 seconds, no one spoke. Then Margaret let out a soft, broken sob. Thomas's lips parted, but no words came. And Emily, she just stared at the floor. The truth had finally arrived, and it was louder than any scream. Dr. Phil's voice lowered. "Emily, I know this is a lot to take in. You came here seeking answers, and now you have them. How do you feel right now?" Emily looked up slowly. Her voice was fragile, trembling, but clear. "I thought this would make me feel complete," she said. "But right now, I just feel empty." Her mother reached toward her, tears streaming down her face. "Emily, please," she whispered. "You have to believe me. I didn't steal you. They told me you were mine." The host glanced at Margaret, then back to Emily. "There are no villains here," he said softly. "Just people who were trying to love and hold on to what little they had." Margaret reached across the table, her hand shaking. "You're my daughter," she said through tears. "Maybe not by blood, but by every scraped knee, every lullaby, every tear you cried. I was there." Emily's lower lip trembled. "And I'll never forget that," she said quietly. "But I need to understand where I come from. I need to know who I really am." Thomas finally spoke, his voice deep and cracked with emotion. "You're both right," he said. "You don't lose a child because of a lab mistake. And you don't stop being a mother because of a DNA test." The entire room seemed to exhale. Dr. Phill leaned back, his eyes soft. "Sometimes," he said, "the truth doesn't break a family. It rebuilds it on something stronger." Margaret reached out again, and this time, Emily didn't pull away. Slowly, she took her mother's hand, squeezing it. Then she reached for Thomas's too. The three of them sat there, an unthinkable triangle bound by pain, but also by something else, grace. There was no applause, just silence, the kind that carries more weight than any words ever could. Emily looked out toward the audience, voice trembling but sure. "The truth didn't erase my family," she said softly. "It just helped me see what love really means." The camera caught the tears slipping down her cheeks. Dr. Phil's hand rested gently on her shoulder, and for a moment, even he was quiet. The screen faded to black for a beat. Then, in a whisper that almost sounded like a prayer, Emily said, "It wasn't about who gave me life, but who gave me love." But what she chose to do next, no one saw coming. When the truth destroys your past, can forgiveness rebuild your future? Months passed, yet that moment in the studio never really left Emily. It lived in her chest like a second heartbeat, soft, steady, impossible to ignore. Every time she saw a family laughing in a grocery aisle or a mother brushing her child's hair, she felt it, the strange blend of grief and gratitude that came from knowing the truth. After the show, the world didn't go quiet. Her story spread, clips circulating online, headlines calling it the switch at birth that stunned Dr. Phill. People she'd never met sent letters, emails, and messages. Some offered comfort. Others shared their own stories of hidden secrets, adoption, betrayal, forgiveness. Emily read every single one. One letter, written in careful cursive, stood out. It read, "Because of your story, I took a DNA test too. I found my sister after 40 years. That's when Emily realized something important. Maybe the purpose of her pain wasn't just to expose the truth, but to help others find theirs. She took that idea and turned it into something tangible, a small nonprofit called Legacy of Truth. It started in her living room with one donated laptop and a handful of volunteers. Their mission? To help families affected by hospital mix-ups, adoption fraud, and missing identities reconnect. Ethically, compassionately, truthfully. Soon, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Mothers searching for lost children. Sons trying to trace their real fathers. People haunted by the same question that once consumed her. Who am I, really? But through all of it, Emily never lost sight of what truly mattered. She still called Margaret every Sunday. Sometimes they laughed, sometimes they cried. Margaret never stopped apologizing, but Emily no longer needed her to. "You're my mother," she'd say softly. "You always will be." And Thomas. He became the quiet presence she didn't know she'd been missing. He'd call her kiddo and send photos of sunsets from the farm. One afternoon, he surprised her with something small but life-changing, an old, framed photo of his wife, Helen. In it, Helen was smiling, holding a newborn baby swaddled in pink. On the back, Thomas had written, "No matter what name you were given, you were always loved." Emily stared at that picture for a long time, and for the first time since the envelope, she felt peace. Not because the story had a perfect ending, but because it had an honest one. Her voice became a beacon in support groups and talk shows. She never dramatized her pain. She told it like it was raw, real, human. She reminded people that the truth doesn't always come to destroy. It comes to heal what's been hidden too long. In one interview, a reporter asked her, "Do you ever wish you'd never taken that DNA test?" Emily smiled gently. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but then I remember what my father said. You don't stop being a mother because of a DNA test, and you don't stop being a daughter because of the truth." She paused, her gaze steady. Knowing who you are isn't about finding one family. It's about understanding all the love that built you. As she spoke, the camera panned across the room. Photos of her two families now hung side by side. No labels, no categories, just faces, memories, and love that refused to fit into boxes. Her story had begun in a storm of confusion, but now it ended in quiet strength. The same girl who once begged to just know the truth had learned something greater. The truth isn't the end, it's the beginning of healing. On the first anniversary of her nonprofit, Emily stood on stage before a crowd of reunited families. Some cried, some held hands. She looked out over them and said, "We all want to believe the truth will break us. But it doesn't. It rebuilds us, piece by piece, with honesty, forgiveness, and love." Applause filled the hall. Cameras flashed, but Emily didn't notice. She was watching one woman in the crowd, a young mother holding her baby close, tears glistening under the lights. And in that moment, Emily smiled. Because that was it. That was what all the pain had been for. What began as a secret ended as a movement. Sometimes, the truth doesn't break you. It builds you into who you were always meant to be. Would you still want to know the truth, even if it changed everything? If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect. How much of who we are is shaped by truth, and how much by love? Share your story in the comments, because sometimes your truth could be the one that helps someone else find theirs. And if you believe in stories that heal instead of hurt, stick around. The next one might just change how you see your own life.